Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tank. My name is Alan. During the early days of the Ryloth occupation, clone Captain Howzer was in charge of the clone stormtroopers on the planet. Now everything pointed towards Captain Howzer being a decent person. He had a great deal of respect for Cham Syndulla and his resistance fighters and their struggle against the Separatist Alliance. He was flexible with how he interpreted his orders from Imperial High Command. He also avoided punitive measures against the Twi'leks whenever possible. Captain Howzer tries his best to keep the peace between the people of Ryloth and the Empire. He's your ideal officer for a peacekeeping operation. But as the Empire continues to clamp down on the freedoms of the Twi'lek people, Captain Howzer ultimately has to choose a side. And as many of you predicted in one of our previous videos, Captain Howzer does the right thing, and that's because of his really cool haircut and the fact that his armor is teal instead of just plain white. Probably. Howzer even tries to appeal to the clone troopers beneath his command to not obey Imperial orders, and many of them seem to also have issues with their current mission and directives and join him. Now, Howzer and the clones loyal to the Republic's original mission are rounded up immediately and most likely will be recycled and turned into protein ration squares. I'm just joking, we're not exactly sure what's going to happen to Captain Howzer, but I'm pretty sure that Dave Filoni will milk Captain Howzer's situation, nipples, and we'll see eventually, for better or worse, what happens to him. But this all points towards larger issues for the Empire and Palpatine. Right now, 99% of their armed forces are made up of clone troopers that could potentially rebel. So today we're going to take a look at what needs to happen for a clone rebellion to occur. We have to remember that the clone troopers were created and indoctrinated to serve the Republic. This was built directly into their training and sense of identity. Even though clones are grown in labs and ultimately don't have real families outside of the JAR, they still are humans. And humans are motivated heavily by goals they set for themselves. Otherwise, life would be pointless. Because of the clones' isolation from the rest of the galaxy, clones are able to better focus on their prime directive of protecting the Republic and the JAR. They really don't have anything else. In a way, the JAR and the Republic is their extended family. And so what happens when the Republic transitions to the Empire? Well, from what we can tell, the clones aren't actually directly loyal to Darth Sidious. Sure, we have Order 66 protocol, but after doing several in-depth videos about how the chip works and functions, we realize that this is just mental conditioning designed to trigger one response and one behavior, and that is the assassination of their Jedi commanders. Order 66 most likely needed to be triggered by the Supreme Chancellor or even directly Palpatine. But it doesn't necessarily mean that these chips will just force the clones to comply to everything that Palpatine wants them to. The loyalty that Palpatine gets from the clones instead comes from their loyalty to the Republic and the chain of command. I mean, even dictators need to appease certain individuals in their own government and definitely their own military force. Now, Palpatine gets his control at the beginning of the Clone Wars when Junior Representative Jar Jar Binks convinces the Senate to give Chancellor Palpatine emergency powers to bypass the Military Creation Act. One of those powers is the Reflex Amendment, which allows the Chancellor to bypass the Senate over all military affairs. Kind of like every major conflict the United States has been in since World War II, which was the last time Congress declared war formally. Now, eventually Palpatine takes these powers and becomes the Supreme Commander of the Grand Army of the Republic, aka the Commander of all of the clones. Now, Palpatine takes it a step further by declaring himself the Emperor of the newly founded Galactic Empire shortly after Order 66. One could argue that what Palpatine is doing here is against the Republic's constitution. It's a good argument, but ultimately it's just one of many viewpoints on this situation. And like in any political discussion, it's not just about who is right or wrong. Instead, it's about who has more political support. It's an unfortunate byproduct of our governmental system. Politics are very necessary. In Palpatine's defense, he created a very credible threat in the Jedi Order, and one could argue that he amended the Constitution for the greater good of the galaxy. More importantly, Palpatine had enough senators and supporters on his side to facilitate a smooth transition to dictatorship. So how did the clones respond to Palpatine's hostile takeover? Well, the main thing to remember is that clones are not robots, they are living, thinking individuals, and although they were raised in a very controlled environment designed to make them like robots, what happens to the clones during the war is the complete opposite of controlled. War is the definition of chaos. And so there are many different factors at play that shapes these clones post-Kamino. Like, who is their military commander? Some judicial force officer turned military officer like Kendall Ozzel, or a wise and compassionate Jedi like Yoda. Or maybe someone stricter like Mace Windu, or maybe someone who's driven by passion and excitement like Anakin Skywalker or Ahsoka Tano. I mean, should we be surprised that Captain Rex turned out the way he did after spending so much time with these two crazy Jedi? Probably not. Now, we don't really know who Captain Howzer was influenced by, but clearly he's developed a very clear conscience and moral compass. And his experiences with Cham Syndulla and the Twilight people have made him sympathetic to their cause. Then we have individuals like Commander Cody, who followed a by-the-textbook commander like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Cody is more likely to follow the existing command chain and continue carrying out his duties after Order 66. Because of the genetic alterations to the clones and additional conditioning carried out by the Kaminoans, most clones start off life pretty obedient and lacking individual initiative. So the actual amount of rebellious clones is unfortunately going to be pretty limited. I think it's going to be a minority. You also have individuals like Crosshair. We originally thought that perhaps the Order 66 chip inside of his head made him into a monster, but it's possible that his own genetic mutations and experiences in life already drove him on that path. Well, maybe monster's not a fair word to describe Crosshair with. Perhaps given his role as a marksman in the Special Forces has shown him more than his fair share of collapsed and failed states, he might just recognize that heavy-handed governance of the Empire is exactly what the galaxy needs to promote stability. There's also the fact that even his fellow clone brothers treat him like a freak, which really doesn't help his mental health and social development. Which is potentially why he likes this more repressive dictatorship. Now, with the billions of clones, you're gonna have billions of different opinions and individual personalities, so it's gonna be really messy. Now, even if a lot of clone troopers try to rebel like Captain Howzer, it's still gonna be relatively difficult for the clone troopers to organize amongst themselves. And that's because, like we mentioned before, the JAR is all the clones have. Clone troopers don't really have many connections to the outside world. They don't have family and friends beyond the military. And when they do, like Cal Skirata and his clone commandos, well, most of those clones eventually do go AWOL and rebel against the Empire. Without individuals like Cal Skirata, this means that escaping from the Stormtrooper Corps will be extremely difficult. On top of that, it's pretty easy to recognize the clones because they all have the same face. Like, it actually makes no sense that Cutler Quain hasn't been spotted yet and arrested for desertion. He clearly is a clone. The other problem is individuals like Captain Howzer are much less likely to actually try to kill his fellow brothers. I mean, he just seems like a nice guy. When Howzer decides to warn Cham Syndulla of an ambush waiting for him, he could have left the Resistance fighters and escaped custody. Instead, he goes back and gets himself and other clones who are loyal to him and the Twi'leks arrested. This is probably going to be a fatal move. Even Captain Rex, who is highly suspicious of any clone with their inhibitor chip still intact, still tries his best to stun clone troopers instead of kill them outright. This mentality does not make a clone trooper an ideal Resistance fighter or rebel fighter against other clones. Now, given the Empire's heavy-handed policy against traitors, it's very likely that Captain Howzer and the clones that followed him to disobey orders are going to be executed. Governor Captain Moff Tarkin, whatever he is at this point, really likes to use fear to control people. If he does execute a bunch of clones publicly, this will generate a lot more problems in the clone army. If the Empire were smart, which they generally aren't, they would quickly execute those clones and treat them as a contamination. Something that you would not want to spread to the masses or even let other people know about. I mean, you guys remember what happened on Umbara when General Ponkrell tries to have Fives and Jesse executed for disobeying orders? Only Dogma seems to be into the whole process. Everyone else refused to carry out the order. Although it should be noted that this was the 501st, aka Anakin's Legion. What the clones actually need is help from outsiders, from fighters like Cham Syndulla or even Saw Gerrera. These people understand what the Empire actually is and can help further unwind the brainwashing of the Kaminoans and teach the clones how to be Resistance fighters. The clones really need an underground railroad to ferry them off to safety and to other clones with a similar mindset. But unfortunately, due to what the military represents for most clones, aka their only family and the only home they know, leaving will be much harder than for a non-clone who has many other things to look forward to in life than just shooting people in the face. The unfortunate truth is that most people are followers. Most people do not want to stand out on their own or think for themselves. People like being in groups, and that's because humans are social animals, and throughout many generations of human evolution, it's always been beneficial to follow group culture and social norms in order to survive. People who walk their own path are oftentimes ostracized and seen as a threat throughout history. And as we mentioned before, the clones with their genetics and conditioning are much more susceptible to this type of groupthink mentality. This ultimately is why so few clones left the military after Order 66. For there to be a mass uprising against the Empire, there really needs to be some kind of charismatic leader, a prime clone. An individual like Captain Rex, for instance. And all he needs to do is point out the obvious truth, the same truth that deserters like Slick and Cutler Queen understood in the very first year of the war. The clones are slaves, and they aren't given rights or appreciated for what they do, and the Empire is not a legitimate government, but a hostile takeover of a representative democracy. Furthermore, Emperor Palpatine and individuals like Vice Admiral Rampart and his Project War Mantle seeks to replace the clones anyway. The discontinuation of the Kaminoan cloning project will also point towards the eventual retirement of all clones. And so, as you can see, there are many different reasons for why the clone troopers should rebel, and it's not just because Palpatine destroyed the Republic and created the Empire. Now, the current Disney canon doesn't really say much about this period of history, so we're not exactly sure what is going to happen. But I think it's very possible that in the coming episodes, or maybe the next season, we will see a much larger movement of clones rebelling against the Empire. Either way, I don't think this transition is over yet, and I think there's going to be a lot of bloodshed and tears that are ultimately going to be shed because brothers are going to be killing brothers. Well guys, let me know in the comment section below what you think about all this. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.